Ohayou gozaimasu. Welcome along to part 3 of my consideration of Kurosawa and comedy, and a quick consideration of what I think is perhaps Kurosawa's most overtly comedic film, Charisma. I think in this film certainly we get scenes and moments that come the closest of any in Kurosawa's body of work to being obviously comedic. There are scenes, for instance, featuring characters taking magic mushrooms and hallucinating, of the protagonist being seemingly incessantly hungry, like some sort of importation from a stoner comedy, constantly having the munchies. There's even a sort of repeated gag where the protagonist, played by Yakusho Koji, finds himself caught in an animal trap, a bear trap, which is fairly dramatic the first time, but the second time it happens is played for deadpan laughs. It's almost like the old joke of the person standing on rakes and being smacked in the face. And these are, by and large, overtly funny, obviously funny, played for deadpan laughs, as I say, in a way that very little else in Kurosawa's filmography is. The film itself, perhaps in outline, doesn't suggest comedy, doesn't suggest a barrel of chuckles. Yakusho Koji plays a cop, or as it quickly transpires, an ex-cop, who stumbles whilst out in the forest into a kind of war zone between three different factions who all have a vested interest in either protecting or removing, destroying the charisma of the title, which is a tree that is apparently secreting toxins through its roots and destroying other sort of vegetation, other trees, plants, what have you, in the surrounding area. There's a young man who wants to preserve charisma. There's a group who want to make off with the tree, ultimately for sort of financial gain. And there's a woman and her seemingly sort of mentally subpar sister, for want of a better way of putting it, who want to remove the tree and save and preserve the trees and the wildlife of the forest. And Yakusho stumbles into this, what is presented as a kind of existential battleground, and becomes like a sort of detached liminal presence who moves between the three different groups, whilst fully aligning himself with none of them. The space of the forest then seems quite definitively to cue us in to thinking about this film in allegorical terms. And indeed, in Japanese cinema, there has been something like a proliferation of films set in forests that similarly make use of this space as a kind of self-contained, almost insular entity with its own laws, its own magic, its own ecosystems, its own powers. I'm thinking of films like Funky Forest, Heavenly Forest, Kawase Naomi's The Morning Forest, Aoyama Shinji's Mike Hammer film, The Forest with No Name, to name just four. I think there are several others. All of these films make very specific play with the sort of realities of the forest and with the sort of allegorical or symbolic potentialities thereof as well. And Charisma is no exception. As I said, it seems to be figured as some sort of an existential war zone where these different points of view, different desires are playing out. There are various lines peppered throughout the film in the dialogue that give us a hint or that cue us into thinking in some kind of allegorical terms. There's a line spoken to Yakusho Koji's protagonist early on where he is sort of almost berated, but not quite, for repairing to the forest in order to find some sort of spiritual fulfillment. So there's a kind of a quasi critique, you may think, of sort of human interventions in the forest and uses of the forest for our own good that perhaps do nothing to benefit the forest itself. And this tension that ultimately arises between the very special tree, Charisma, and the surrounding forest is something that's crystallized in a line spoken by Yakusho Koji to one of the two women, to the sister, the kind of sort of mentally deficient sister of the woman who is attempting to destroy Charisma. He is trying to find a different Charisma, or he believes he's found another tree that is special. And he says that the key is to decide for oneself whether one special tree in effect supersedes the well-being of the forest as a whole, of the sort of average trees, if you like. So again, there's a sort of foundation of allegory where perhaps reflecting on, in Japanese terms, individuality versus fitting in with the group, sort of the individual pitted against the communal, giri and ninjo, a dichotomy often seen in jidaigeki and yakuza films, and something that's often perceived in quite a simplistic way, I have to say, as central to Japanese society, which is often taken to be a society in which the group, the workplace, the family takes precedence over the individual. So there are these cues throughout, these clues, we may say, to what is being allegorized. Typically, I think Kurosawa sort of sits back and slyly drip feeds these clues to give us something to latch onto. But he withholds as much as he reveals, and I don't think there is anything that is kind of definitive in terms of reading this film. And I think that is perhaps where something like the film's comedy arises. I think, for instance, the sort of quasi-stoner comedy of having Yakusho Koji sort of high on magic mushrooms, hallucinating and then getting the munchies, suggests one type of an attempt to get to grips with the reality of living in the forest, of sort of removing oneself from civilization, as he does, although we get very little in the way of an explanation of this. There's an incident at the beginning, and thereafter he just sort of finds himself in the forest and stays there. But this sort of comedy of trying to get to grips with the realities of the forest, trying to sustain oneself on what the forest provides, offers a kind of comedic riff on this theme, this tension that I've already outlined. What we have here in Charisma, I think, are a world of different allegorical potentialities that are orbiting around the film, as it were, the sort of diegetic space of the forest, and which it's up to us to put together or not. I think ultimately the joke is actually on us in this film in a weird way. I think we are the butt of any humour insofar as we attempt to piece together the various parts of the film and try and make it cohere. The more I've seen this film, the more I'm put in mind of a very concise, very satirical short work, a kind of philosophical tract dressed up as a novella by the great Italo Calvino called Mr. Palomar. And the story, such as it is, or short sort of scenes, episodes that constitute this work, feature the Italian man of the title as he gazes on different animals, different landscapes, finds himself in different environments, different countries, and tries to sort of put himself in a particular mental space where he can construct some kind of specific meaning that sort of extols his own relationship to these worlds, these spaces. There's even a short episode in this work in which Palomar visits a Ryoanji in Kyoto, where, as it were, contemplation is narrativized. The whole point of this rock garden and surrounding sand formation or sand art is to put oneself in a contemplative mindset. So it's kind of foregrounding and underlining contemplation as a sort of construct, and to make us aware of what factors sort of influence this notion of contemplation, whether we are losing ourselves in some pre-existing reality or whether we are in fact kind of creating some kind of reality, or whether we are sort of turning in upon ourselves and becoming entirely subjective. There's a very particular moment in Mr. Palomar in which there's a discussion or a discourse that plays out to do with the fact that Palomar is trying to construct a model for adequately sort of defining reality. And it talks about fundamentally the impossibility of doing this, of trying to fit the sort of chaotic, amorphous, inchoate sort of parameters of the world into some neat little blueprint or paradigm that kind of adequately explains that world and our place in it. And in a sense that we become sort of Palomars watching Charisma. We try and sort of take our leave from the clues that we are given and try and fit or even retrofit some kind of coherent world or coherent vision. And this is constantly, I think, the film is constantly turning the tables on us. And I think that's where the overt comedy comes into play here. It's making us kind of aware that to exist in this environment, this sort of insular forest space, is to be subject to a kind of amorphous other reality that we can but sort of falter in front of, that we can but kind of be found wanting in terms of trying to define or trying to sort of delimit the boundaries and parameters thereof. So the obvious comedy is about characters sort of failing to adapt in one way or another to this environment, and essentially that's what we as viewers fail to do here. So this is very much a film about failure. Interestingly, just like Creepy, I think making the two films something of a companion, this film opens with a very similar scene in which the protagonist intervenes in and distinctly fails to bring about a successful conclusion to a kind of hostage episode. And each film sort of takes its flight from these respective failures. And so failure is writ large here, and the sort of comedic undertakings of continually trying to do something that is kind of inevitably doomed to failure, as we do as viewers trying to construct a reading or construct meaning, is ultimately what this film is about. There are also other intriguing potential readings here. The space of the forest is kind of presented in some ways as a sort of primordial otherness, something that has always superseded sort of human contact and involvement, that existed before humans and will exist afterwards. But there's also a cryptic moment in which a tree appears, whether it's real or just perceived, and it looks like nothing so much as a mushroom cloud, giving us a strong sense of indexing all this to Japanese history. So there's a sense of the very beginning of things and the end of things, which factors into this tension between life and death and survival. There's also a sly and very funny, I think, commentary on commodification. Yakusho's character seems to randomly, arbitrarily pick out a tree that he designates as another charisma, and it's one that the people who want to steal charisma end up trying to buy from him, at which point his female colleague's sister sort of tells them they can have the tree and makes off with their money before they realise that this is some sort of a con. The idea of a con here, not just relating to the sense of being conned out of the money in this particular situation, but of kind of laying ownership to something, claiming ownership of something, commodifying it in a way, sort of selling it as a thing, as an object, something unique, something with value because you are selling it. So it becomes kind of an end in itself, this cycle of commodification. Is there a sort of commentary on nascent capitalism here? Again, is there a sense that we're looking in a mirror, that the joke is on us for naming this a Kurosawa film and trying to construct it in the image of other Kurosawa films, to read it as a kind of auteur construct? Again, the whole process by which we engage with this film appears ultimately to be one big protracted joke. That's my view anyway. You, doubtless, if you've seen it, will have your own views, so please do comment, let me know. Let's discuss charisma, let's discuss Kurosawa and comedy. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found something of use here. If you have, then consider liking and subscribing. If you haven't, then fine, do one, disappear, and I still thank you. Stay tuned. There'll be much more to come in the very near future, both here and online at culturaljapan.com, in which I just posted a review of Kurosawa's film Wife of a Spy. So if you have seen and liked that film, or if you're interested in Kurosawa, please do give that a look. Otherwise, I will talk to you again very soon, and goodbye for now.